Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and our mission is to bring you interviews with leaders in the environmental industry with the goal of providing you information about industry trends, climate change, future energy, circular economy, regulatory topics, and service providers making an impact in the business. And today's guest is Joel Burcat. Joel is an attorney and an author of three good selling, great selling books. They're called A Mid Rage, Drink to Every Beast, and Strange Fires. Fire, sorry. How you doing, Joel? Welcome to the show.
Good, Sean. Happy to be here.
Oh, great! I'm glad to bring you on and talk a little bit about these environmental thrillers that you have written, and pretty excited about that. So,
Um,
tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump in.
sure, of course. I am a graduate of Vermont Law School, and which is a heavily environmental law-oriented law school, and then went to work for Pennsylvania DER, Department of Environmental Resources, and then
Okay.
went into private practice after that. So for my entire career, I practiced in environmental law, and really nothing else. I did a lot of writing, professional writing as an environmental lawyer, and I'm going to say
Sure.
about 15 years ago, I began writing fiction. I always liked fiction. I always wrote a little bit of fiction, but about 15 years ago, I started getting serious about it. And now I have two books published and a third one on the way.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, you having that perspective from the lawyer side of the house is kind of interesting as it relates to environmental issues of the day and working for the state. I mean, that's got to be a an interesting background. I'm sure you have lots of stories to tell there, don't you?
Well, some of them find their way into my books, and some of them are completely made up, and some are war stories told by some of my colleagues and friends who have whispered in my ear and allowed me to use some of their war stories. But yeah, I over the years I picked up a lot of interesting information, and I've been places that most other people have not been. So it's really been quite an extraordinary experience for me, and really something that I draw on in my writing.
Well, okay, let's dive in a little bit. Tell us about your books. I think "Drink to Every Beast" and a mid rage, and "Strange Fire." Tell us about those.
Sure. They're all environmental legal thrillers. So if you think of John Grisham and his stories, The Pelican Brief, The Appeal, Gray's Mountain, those are environmental legal thrillers. So my book is in that general genre and category. Um, really drawing on my background and experience and drawing on some real cases. I wrote
Hmm.
Drink to Every Beast, which is about midnight dumping or dumping chemicals in a river, illegally dumping chemicals in a river. And the story starts out with a horrific death of two teenagers who come in contact with these chemicals that were illegally dumped in the river.
Mm.
And
Mm.
our protagonist, our main character, the main man, Mike Jacobs, is a young 26-year-old prosecutor, and he's tasked with working on this investigation. He's the number two lawyer, but because the other lawyer is tied up with some things, Mike really takes the lead for quite a while in the investigation. And Mike is new and he's learning, and sometimes he's a little bit inept. Sometimes he makes some bad choices, both
Hmm.
in the investigation and also in his life. And so that creates an interesting subplot in the story. So, Drink to Every
Uh,
Beast is all about that investigation and trying to stop the dumpers from dumping again. And, I think for me, I thought it was a really good and strong debut novel. Amid Rage, which is the second book in the Mike Jacobs series, Mike's now 2 years older. He's given a lot more responsibility. He managed not to get fired after after things happened in the first story. And
yeah.
in Amid Rage, Mike is involved, stuck in the middle of a coal mining battle. So, briefly stated, the mine operator hates the permit that he's been issued. The neighbors hate the fact that a permit's been issued. They both file appeals. This kind of thing happens a lot. And when that happens, the government agency ends up stuck right in the middle of the case. Mike doesn't want to be in the middle of the case. Mike wants to be representing the citizens and doing the right thing for the environment. But because he's working for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, this is what he's got to do. And he He is there with his best friend and confidant, Nikki Kane, and it's a story dealing with coal miners and with coal mine operators and neighbors, and really looks into issues such as climate change, and looks into issues such as the importance of coal or the lack of importance of coal in this day and age, and really dispute over coal. And really take a deep dive. One of the things I try to do, and I'll mention this now, and I'll probably mention it again, is I figure that my readers are pretty smart people, and they're going to be able to make up their minds on their own. So I really try not to beat you over the head in my story with whatever my opinion might happen to be. I have characters who talk about their situations and their beliefs and their opinions, and I try to leave it up to the reader to decide for themselves what's right and what's wrong. And that becomes particularly important in the third book in the series, which is called Strange Fire. And Strange Fire deals with fracking in Pennsylvania. As we all know, fracking is a hot topic. It's been a hot topic now for over a dozen years in Pennsylvania. And Mike, again, I try to place Mike in difficult situations. So the neighbors actually file an appeal from an action that DEP took supporting the drilling company. So Mike finds himself actually representing the department's position with respect to the drilling company. And of course, the guy who actually represents the drilling company was his arch rival nemesis, the guy who married his girlfriend, Darius Moore, and the two of them really have no love for each other, but they're on the same side. And on the other side are the citizens and a citizens group, and some very, very, very shady characters populate the story. The citizens are furious with what the department's doing. One of the things I try to show in Strange Fire, which I'm very excited will be coming out in a few months, is how the knowledge level and how people's opinions and people's perspectives change and grow over time. So one of the important characters in that story is a woman named Teresa Bruno Campbell, who really has no opinion, I would say, about fracking. She's a woman from Staten Island. Her husband bought this house. It was her husband's family house, I should say, in Bradford County, and she's living there and really had no strong opinions about it. But as she learns, her opinions get very, very strong. And so I try to show how people's positions and opinions can change over time, especially as they learn. So that's sort of a brief thumbnail. Let me say, too, you don't have to read any of the books to be able to follow the other books. So they're really all standalones. I wrote them that way so that you could jump in anywhere. Although if you wanted to start at the beginning, it would be starting with Drink to Every Beast.
Yeah, no, that's great. I like the mid rage, the prologue. I read that, and the entry, the intrigue about the the killers going in and taking out the DEP guy, not issuing a permit, was like really gripping. I was like, oh my gosh, this is pretty intense. And then to bring in the whole Mike Jacobs side of it, and I was hooked. I was ready to like, okay, where's the rest of the book? I have to read this thing because this is really good. And I'm a huge John Grisham fan. I mean, I love those kind of books, and The Associate and all those other good ones he's had over the years. I mean, I just, he's just really grabs me, and it's a good read. And I started reading yours. I was like, oh my gosh, this is my new favorite guy here. So, Joel, I can't wait to start reading your books. I mean, this is gonna be great. Because I need these, and this is really cool. I mean, so the way you were able to depict the scenes from like the coal mine was so vivid. I mean, how were you able to pull from this knowledge to bring this to life? Because this was just amazing.
Well, if you read a novel, one of the things you want to do is you want to be transported to another place in another time. And whether that place is a battlefield in Europe, or whether that place is the Himalayan mountains, or whether it's a jungle in the Amazon, no matter where it is, you want to be there. You want to feel it. You want to smell it. You want to taste it. You want to feel the cold or the heat. Whatever it is, you want to really be there. And
Mm-hmm.
fortunately for me, I've been in strip coal mines, and in Pennsylvania, anything that's not a coal mine is called a non-coal mine. So I've been in strip coal mines and strip non-coal mines. I've been in deep mines, And what I really wanted to do was I felt that the readers of my books would really appreciate understanding and feeling what it's like to be in one of these places, because most people actually don't get to go into a strip mine, or
Oh
they don't
no.
have involvement with a deep mine as we have in Drink to Every Beast. In Strange Fire, I take my readers into the drilling pads where the fracking takes place, and you really do get a sense of what it's really like. I mean,
Wow.
unfortunately, if you just look at TV, you kind of get a really either a very brief sense of what it is, or even a cartoonish sense of what's going on. But I really wanted my readers to be able to appreciate and see what it's like. So there's one scene where in a mid-range where they're driving down a haul road, which is the main entryway into this mine, and coming up is a gigantic dump truck with wheels that are as large as the Jeep that Mike is riding in. And I just wanted the readers to get the sense of the massive size of the equipment, the off-road equipment that they use there, and just get a sense of what it's really like to be there. Get a sense of really the danger of those places, because they are dangerous places, and also really have a feel for what these places are like. So I hope I did that. I tried to do that.
Well, I'd say you succeeded.
I was guided and helped. I'm happy to say I have friends in the industry, in all of these industries, and my friends and were able to guide me. One fellow who is a licensed blasting engineer corrected some of the things. There is a fair amount of blasting that takes place in a mid-range, as you would
Mhm.
find in any strip mine or any non-coal mine in Pennsylvania or anywhere else. And I wanted to make sure that I got it right. I didn't want, because there's always going to be somebody who says, nah, 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 that's not the way it works. So I wanted
Right.
to make sure that I had all the details right. And so I was fortunate to be able to rely on those friends of mine to help me make sure that the details were right. But because I've been in those places, I really wanted my readers to experience those places.
I can remember when I was a regulatory agent, public servant, and we had fish kills to go and investigate, from companies who, inadvertently, released some chemicals that caused a huge fish kill. And so the vividness of that entry, talking about all the fish dying in the water when they were canoeing down, it just brought back a lot of memories for me because we were there to assess what killed the fish,
Right.
and I mean we're talking thousands and thousands of fish, right? And this is the White River in Indiana, right? The main river that goes right through the heart of Indiana, besides the Wabash, and it was a big deal. And when you're in that scene, you're seeing like the carnage and the smell and everything you were describing just brought back so much memory from in my days, 25 years ago when I was in that role doing that for the state of Indiana. So it's kind of interesting and really painted a fantastic picture of the gravity of the situation they were
Right.
encountering.
Well, and that's right. And one of the difficult challenges that I have is, and that any writer has, is taking that thing that you've experienced or that you've seen, and that can be awful and smelly and disgusting, and trying to translate that into words that conveys that information to the reader so that your readers can appreciate it and understand what it is and what it's really like. And again, in a real way, and not in a cartoonish way, or not in sort of a TV way, without
Yeah.
trying to denigrate TV. But sometimes television tends to gloss over things. So in these books, I really try to place the reader in those places.
No, yeah, it was fantastic, and I just, like I said, I'm anxious to get my hands on them so I can get into more detail. But talk a little bit about, why are you writing these types of environmental books? I mean, what is driving your motivation to really, you know, bring up these topics for readers to really, wrap their heads around? I mean, is it's a lot of social awareness right now. I think is in society, and I think the timing of these books is pretty good.
I hope so. My publisher hopes so. Uh, the it's interesting. When I started writing novels, actually, my first novel was about the 1950 Phillies, and that was what I like to call my starter novel. And I enjoyed writing that, and it was a lot of fun to write. but it was not publishable in any way. It was really a
Right.
starter novel. But when
Okay.
I started writing amid Drink to Every Beast, I really wanted to do a couple things, and sort of sort of the way Tom Clancy used to be able to convey what it was like to be in a submarine. And let's face it, submarines are very, very big machines. They're very technical. There's a lot of engineering. There's a lot of science and all that other stuff that goes into it. His books could have been dreadfully boring. I mean, they could have been awful. But people, grabbed those books and they just wanted to read more and more. And as much technical stuff as he put into those books, he was able to convey that in such a way that the readers would say, "Oh man, this is really cool." Not, "Oh God, this is really boring. I can't wait to get another
This
book."
is yeah, this is hard for me to follow.
And I wanted to do the same thing with these environmental issues. I wanted to convey things that can be complicated technical issues, chemicals in a water and in the water, and what does it do? What does it do to human beings? I wanted to convey that, but I wanted to educate people, but I wanted to do it in a way that was interesting and that people would want to read the whole book to learn more about these various issues. And again, I think my readers are smart people, and they're going to figure this stuff out for themselves, which side they're on these issues. And I say that, it's the second time I guess I've said it now. I say that because on some of these issues, I really do present both sides of the issue, and I don't necessarily choose one side or the other. I think you can tell what side I'm on without me getting into it, but I try not to choose that in the book, and I try to leave some of those issues open issues for the readers to decide, because I
Hmm.
really don't think that it's a great idea to just beat people over the head and say you must do this, you must do this.
Yeah, right. No, I think you're
Um,
right. I think the readers are smart. I think they can, read the material and make good decisions on, you know, the issues or the concerns that are being, brought forward. What are some of the big challenges you see with coal mines and that made you write these books?
Well, mining, of course, coal mining in particular is dangerous to start with. But in addition to that, of course, the actual mining process itself is pretty dirty. It releases coal dust. It really changes the immediate environment. The geography of an area gets changed completely while
Hmm.
the mining is going on. Because of the nature of coal, which contains sulfur dioxide in the coal itself. It's a relatively small percent, maybe 1 or 2% of the coal is sulfur dioxide. But because of that, it means then that several things happen. Number one, it puts sulfur into the atmosphere when the coal is being burned, and it puts carbon dioxide, of course, into the atmosphere when the coal is being burned. But on the ground, when that sulfuric material comes in contact with water, it forms sulfuric acid. And that, if you've ever been in a coal mining region and you've driven along the road and you take a look and you see a stream that's yellow or orange or red even, that's because the chemicals in the coal are interacting with the water, and it's turning that water very acid, and it's killing the life in that water. And in many instances, we have hundreds, if not probably thousands of miles of streams in Pennsylvania that are just dead from mining.
Right.
And it's going to be impossible for them to ever recover. So you've got that issue, the immediate issue of the mining itself. And then you've got the question of burning the coal, because coal, of course, releases particulates. It releases a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Coal is a major source of greenhouse gases, and
Hmm. That's right.
it raises a lot of issues. Interestingly, and I look at these statistics all the time. I pulled these statistics for this program today. If you look back from 2008 till 2019, which is the statistics that I have here from the Energy Information Agency, EIA, federal agency, they said that on the west, that east of the Mississippi, that there were 493 million tons that were mined in 2008 of coal, and in 2019 there were only 296 million tons of coal that were mined. So, putting aside climate change issues, putting aside the previous administration and how much it favored coal mining, putting aside all those issues, all on its own, coal is slowly starting to die. And part of the reason for that is when you pull out some other statistics from the agency, you take a look and you see, well, what's replacing it? You look in Pennsylvania, for example, and you see that in 2010, 48% of electricity generation in Pennsylvania came from coal and only 17% came from natural gas. But in those years, it's now gone from 2010 natural gas. I'm sorry, I was wrong. 2010 it was 48% coal. 2019 it's 17% coal. And natural gas went from 15% to 43%. So what's happening in Pennsylvania because of the Marcellus Shale, which is so dominant here in the state, is that it's relatively cheaper, much cheaper to extract BTUs of natural gas than it is
Yeah.
to extract BTUs of coal. So one thing that's happening with coal is that in Pennsylvania and in a lot of other places in the United States, it's dying with respect to other industries. And hopefully, as we transition to sustainable energy sources like solar and wind, so as that is happening, we'll also see the dying out of coal. And one thing that really does trouble me, and I want to make sure I'm really clear about this. I've met a lot of people in the coal mining industry, and people in the coal industry are the salt of the earth, hardest working people I've ever met in my life. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of other tough industries, but coal miners are some of the toughest dudes I've ever met. They work really, really hard. They work under awful conditions. I mean, they're out there on a day like today. I don't know when your listeners are going to be tuning in, but it's like 98 degrees here today. But they're going to be out in February too, when it's 2 degrees outside, and they work in those awful conditions. And a concern that I have when we hear about proposals to replace the jobs, as should happen, is to make sure that those jobs, if they're taken from Indiana, that those jobs are replaced in Indiana. If jobs are lost in Western PA or in Kentucky or in West Virginia, those jobs should be replaced there. They shouldn't just simply all go to South Carolina or the Silicon Valley or someplace like that.
Yeah, you got to
But
take care of those families who are
absolutely,
relying on that industry to provide for their families. I mean, you got to
absolutely.
give them some opportunity there, and for sure. I mean, I think the environmental awareness of greenhouse gas impacts, climate change is definitely affecting that industry. So, it's going to be probably a slow death over time, so to speak, as we transition as a society. I mean, that to me, I've seen so much environmental transformation in the past 3 years. Future energy's coming. I mean, what are we talking? Hydrogen's going to be the next, fuel source, along with, electrical, solar, wind, hydropower, not just hydrogen itself. So, I mean, there's a lot of great alternatives, but coal's still there. Petroleum is still there, right? We're still drilling wells. And I think the society's going to take a while before we can release that dependency, and it's going to be a process. It's not something that we can just turn off the tap. I mean, we wouldn't have cars to drive if they turned the tap off because everything's relying on petroleum right now. It's going to take a time.
Well, you wouldn't have cars and you wouldn't have heat and you wouldn't have air conditioning in the summertime. And it is going to transition. I know that my friends who are really strong environmentalists would like it to transition more quickly. I know people in the industry think that things are just fine and they don't understand why we'd want to transition at all. And you have to think about it. Even if you only have 18% of the electrical generation coming from coal today in Pennsylvania, that's still 18%. That's a lot of energy that's being produced. And it would require a lot of turbines. It would require a lot of solar panels to replace that.
Yeah, I mean, we did an episode on solar a while back, and the cost of solar panels is still pretty expensive for the common person. I mean, an industrial type application can work, or municipal application can work, but if we truly as a society want to go to a more environmentally friendly application, solar panels need to be like about as cheap as you can get them. You can go down to Home Depot and you can hardwire your own setup for the most part. Just call an electrician to connect it to the main line, and that's about as simple as it gets. Or go ahead and actually have mainline inputs at every location, so people can just easily just plug in, and now we're good to go. But we're not there yet. I mean, and if everyone was there, just think of the energy demand, it would totally go down. We'd have more energy that we would be producing as a society because we're capturing it all, and we'd be putting a lot more into the grid than we are taking from the grid,
Well,
in
there's
my
that,
opinion.
and then over time, what we're going to see, I think, in a relatively short period of time, is battery technology improving. It's already
Oh
improving
yeah,
significantly, and as battery technology improves, then at nighttime you don't have to worry as much about solar. You'll just be utilizing battery power. If the winds are dying down, you've got batteries. And so as battery technology improves and battery capacity becomes greater, and it's not just cells. I mean, there are all kinds of creative ideas out there, such as using solar power to push water up into a hydroelectric dam during the day, and then having that water come down at night when the solar power isn't being generated to
generating
operate
more energy.
turbines.
Yeah,
And so there
yeah.
are all kinds of proposals and all kinds of things that are out there. I think we're going to be very fortunate to see a lot of that. I know that the Biden administration is very, very anxious and enthusiastic about having all of that happen and making investments to try to make that happen. But there are a lot of people out there who are pushing in the other direction and who don't want to see that happen.
Well, I mean, just the excitement of electric cars is huge. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of the automotive industry, they're throttling back on production right now, and I think they're all sitting there retooling. Their manufacturing sites, and they're preparing for EV cars as we speak. They're still going to put some petroleum cars out there, but they're really going to start pushing hard into EVs. And let's face it, how many companies have you seen right now that are really going out on the limb, putting out their neck on the line, saying we're going to be zero net carbon by 2035 or 2050? There's a lot of companies moving in the same direction, to be greener, to reduce greenhouse gas impacts. And well, how are you going to do that? You're going to have to do these things, and battery power, hydrogen, alternative energies, and things like that. Hydrogen. So it's just going to be really interesting to see the industry over the next 5 to 10 years and how it progresses, how it transforms.
Well, that's right. And one thing that I remind people from time to time is that it's not just do-gooders, it's not just politics. This is happening from industries where they want to make money. They want to earn a buck, and there's nothing wrong with that. Capitalism is a good thing. We've heard the president and vice president say that many times. And they want to make money, and they recognize that the consumers want to buy these products. And I believe that this is really being consumer driven. And
Yeah.
when you've got Tesla selling out for 2 or 3 years in a row before you can even get one, and when you've got other electric cars that are going through the same kind of thing, and when you've got was it Toyota that I saw the other day, very recently, that they're coming out with about 7 or 8 new electric models, and other companies are doing that as well. I believe that that's being consumer driven more than anything else.
Oh yeah, and just think, I mean, once the competition you know, keeps catches up with Tesla because they've been the big, hot company. I mean, and rightfully so. I mean, Elon and that whole, company has been the leader of this type of technology and ideas. I mean, once these other companies like Toyota and Chevron or Toyota and GM and Ford and all these other guys, they're going to be really, meeting the needs of the market, right? They're going to, if the products are good, hey, I'll take a Toyota versus a Ford or whatever. I mean, it's just because they're all going to be really good. They're not going to be bad cars.
You think about all the different aspects of our society that are interdependent and that are going to have to change. So right now, what pays for our highways? It's that fuel tax. And so if everybody is plugging their car in at night and not relying on fuel, on petroleum fuel,
Yeah,
somehow or another, that whole process, that whole mechanism for paying for highways and
the
state police
funding
in a lot of
of
places, that
infrastructure is
is
going to
up to.
take a hit. They need to hurry up and figure out how to alter that revenue stream, aren't
That's
they?
right. That's right.
No, that's a great point, Joel. I mean, the thing about being interconnected, and then like you mentioned, the consumers are really driving a lot of the environmental changes that we're seeing in society. If it's say going electric on cars, or reducing your waste, circular economy things. This reusing and single use plastics is another topic. Greenhouse. I mean, so many things are being brought to forefront. I mean, people like consumers want to know what they're purchasing and what the products are and who's delivering the best product because they care, right? They care and they want to spend their money where they see the value.
Well, I think that's right, and I think that we're going to see a lot of that over the next several years. Because, like I said, my view is that what's been happening over the past 7 or 8 years at least is really been consumer driven more than government driven. Certainly over the last 4 years. I think with the Biden administration, they're going to be doing what they can to promote a lot of these technologies. But up until now, and certainly for the past 4 years, it's been very consumer driven.
Yeah, no, I would agree, and I'm excited to see what happens because if the consumers are driving the changes, then the companies are going to react and they're going to put out the products that the consumers want, and it'll be a more competitive landscape as it relates to the products, and we'll get better value because the competition will be there. Uh,
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, I'm looking forward to. Well, okay, let's get back on the books here a bit because we kind of diverged a bit, but that was some good conversation. So, what do you think about these stories making a movie? I mean, just reading what I read, I was like, these could be awesome movies.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm still waiting for a call from Steven Spielberg. If you happen to know Spielberg, tell him to give me a call. But I did have a mid-range turned into an audiobook, and I was very, very pleased with that. And that whole process was very different because I got to audition the voice actors for the book, and I was very happy with Burke Allen, who is the voice actor for my book Mid-Rage, and he just did a great job, and I've gotten some terrific reviews of the audiobook. Now that came out earlier this year when people were still not driving quite as much, and I think still to this day the biggest use of audiobooks and Audible and all of that is when people are in their cars driving to and from work or driving to places and the like. People also use them when they're working around the house or doing chores and things like that. But in any event, so that was fun doing that. Obviously, I'd love it if somebody, if you've got a listener out there who's interested in
Oh
talking
man, I just think that this would be a fantastic book. I mean, whoever who's making movies out of John Grisham books ought to be making movies out of Joel Burcat books, is my opinion.
wow, I appreciate that, Sean. Thank you. And
I
like I
mean,
said,
they're
the
pretty
audio,
cool.
yeah, it would be cool. It'd be a lot of fun, but I'm not getting ahead of myself. That's for sure.
Well, hey, we'll try to keep doing our part to help, promote and raise the awareness of this. But these books, they're touching a nerve, and people are starting, like you said, become more aware of their environmental conditions in on the earth we live in. Climate change is such a threat. That people are really concerned about it, and an existential threat, right? That's kind of what the word I was looking for. And a lot of naysayers, and it's like, well, hey, look, yeah, it's a problem, but I've been looking at. I'm a biology major. I'm a scientist. I look at and work with the environment all the time, and to ignore the signs and to not kind of realize, look, we should be thinking about addressing these concerns. You know, you'd be a fool to not start thinking, let's prepare, let's make some changes, let's try to not maybe you can't reverse everything, but at least stop some of the degradation that's happening, right? I mean, I think these books can help bring that awareness.
I hope so. And one thing that I'd like your listener, I think your listeners are a very sophisticated audience, from what I know of your program, and they are aware of the fact that this isn't just one or two scientists or one or two government agencies that are being promoted in a political way to say these things, but that it's the nations of the world. It's literally every nation of the world that has the equivalent of a National Academy of Sciences, and they all do, that are saying the same thing. It's the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a United Nations task force, if you will, that has said this. And it's the scientists of the world with some amazing number of scientists that are in agreement on this, something like 96 or 97%. So, sure, there's going to be a couple of guys out there who don't believe in it, or they think that climate change is being caused by natural causes, or they think that it's being exaggerated. But the reality of it is, the ones who are pushing back the most against the science of climate change really aren't the scientists. It's the politicians, it's the radio talk show hosts, it's the talking heads on TV, and because of the nature of network news, they always feel as though they have to have balance. So if they're going to have one guy who's talking about some
Yeah.
important issue on climate change, then they've got to find one guy who's going to say the opposite. And
Right.
but when you take a look at, like I said, the IPCC, you look at all of it's something like 190 nations of the world through their national academies of sciences and through other organizations, similar organizations, that have come out and said the same thing. Climate change is real. It's being caused by man-induced changes to the
Hmm.
atmosphere, and it's
Hmm.
speeding up. I mean,
Yeah, it's
in,
speeding up, and to reverse it, and the effects are already happening. I mean, you know, if you can't realize, with the extreme heat, the droughts, the various weather storms and patterns we're having, the winters there. I mean, everything seems to be just changing before our eyes, and the effects of climate change are real. I was at some, and I'll have to admit it. There was a time in my life where I felt like, we're doing so much for addressing climate here in the U.S. Why are we the ones having to pay the biggest price, right? When you've got Russia or China or these India or all these other countries that aren't doing their part, right? It's like, let them deal with it, and then when they get ready to get serious, come talk to me, come talk to us, right? And I thought like that for a while, and then I realized, as I started to investigate this more, it's like, look, I can't think like that. What am I doing? I mean, every little bit that we can do as a society to make the change is still going to have an effect regardless of the other people, right? And it's big enough an issue, and it's important enough that we need to take action now. And I had a couple of guests on in previous episodes. Tom Bowman is one of our leaders in the climate change arena here. He's got a couple books out that he's written on it, and they've been helping write a playbook for the Paris Accord pack agreement people. Fantastic work they're doing. Some of the stories he's been able to tell, just really kind of really cemented the idea of some of these, maybe some of the errors in my way of thinking it too. And I was like, you know what? And I work with this a lot, but it's a big deal, and I'm glad that we're starting to see more and more people become more aware of this issue and be concerned.
well, other countries, in fact, are doing their part. Of course, not all of them. But you look at a country like England, the old expression, carrying coals to Newcastle. Why was that an expression? Because that was a useless activity, because who in their right mind would carry coal to a Newcastle, which was a gigantic coal exporting region of England? Today, they don't mine coal in England, or if they do, it's a tiny, tiny fraction of a percent of what they
Mm-hmm.
used to use. They burn hardly any coal. So coal has been almost completely eliminated from the energy stream in England. You look at France. France has switched over to nuclear power. So you look at these countries that, in fact, have transformed away other countries as well, but those are just the ones that come to mind. But yes, of course, Germany and could be doing better, and certainly India and China could be doing a lot better. But I think over time they will, and over time they'll be pressured to do better. Plus, if we're not mining coal in this country, then we're not exporting coal, and our coal exports, in fact, are being burned elsewhere. I mean, there's so many interesting political issues, and the G7 met just a few weeks ago and could not reach an agreement regarding coal, in part, I think, because of the United States and Germany and Italy and other countries that still rely on coal. But I think we're going to see that. We are seeing that change because there's a lot of pressure from other countries as well. And certainly when you start looking at what's happening around us, I mean, you'd have to be a lot blinder than I am. You'd have to be blind, really, to not see that You've got this incredible these heat domes, the highest temperatures ever in the Portland and Seattle areas for days on end. You've got melting of the global ice caps. I mean, these are not
They're real, yeah, it's real
chicken,
issues. They're real
it's not Chicken
issues.
Little. It's not Chicken Little.
No, no, you're right. And so, these types of thrillers and books that you're writing. I mean, so tell us a little bit about, some of these types of stories are kind of themed stories. Like we have yours is called an environmental legal thriller. But there's also some of these other types of thrillers like eco thriller or environmental thriller or cli-fi thrillers. Talk a little bit about the differences between these a bit because I noticed on your blog on your website you kind of had some, you wanted to differentiate a bit about what they were like and maybe give some examples of what these types of differences are.
All right. So while my books, Drink to Every Beast and Mid-Rage and Strange Fire, are environmental legal thrillers, they sort of fall into the same genre as a John Grisham story like Pelican Brief or The Appeal or Gray's Mountain. And there are a couple of others, but not very many really. When I started writing, I took a look and I thought, somebody said, "Oh, you write eco thrillers." Well, I enjoy reading eco thrillers, and I was thinking to myself, well, what are the books that are considered eco thrillers? I mean, these are books like the Monkey Wrench Gang that I'm sure you and other people have read. There are books like Jaws. There's Relic from Preston and Child. I mean, there are a lot of books that are out there, and I thought, well, what's the similarity between these books? And it occurred to me that other than the fact that the environment was at the center of the story, there wasn't really that much difference. Or there was a lot of difference, but they were not, they could be grouped into four categories. So the four categories that I came up with are, of course, environmental thrillers, which would be sort of real life environmental stories or more or less real life environmental stories. So the granddaddy of them all is the Monkey Wrench Gang, and dealing with, if you want to call it by the nicest term, environmental activists out west. Some would call them eco-terrorists, but they were environmental activists out west who were fighting against development in the West. That's the Monkey Wrench Gang, written by Edward Abbey. And you've got a guy named Carl Hyacin, who's one of my favorite writers out of Florida, who a lot of his books deal with environmental themes. And Hyacin has written some terrific books. A lot of them deal with the Everglades and with development in the Everglades. He just came out with a book called Squeeze Me, which is about people releasing non-indigenous snake species into the Everglades and how they're taking over the Everglades and killing all of the wildlife there because there's no predator for them. So those are your environmental thrillers. And then I thought, well, the old style thrillers are the traditional ones I'm calling the eco thrillers. So those would be books like, well, let's say Jaws, for example, or Jurassic Park. I mean, these are books that have a lot of environmental aspects to them, some change in the environment. There's maybe a little bit of science fiction involved in them. So, in Jurassic Park, the science fiction element is that they're able to unlock the DNA of these dinosaurs. And Jaws, of course, are these great white sharks that go crazy and start eating people and eating everything in sight. And so those I put in the eco thriller category. The next category would be, of course, the environmental legal thrillers, my books and Grisham's and a couple of others. And then you've got a relatively new category called cli-fi. And cli-fi is, I've seen it described by a number of different writers and scholars. It's not just a book about the climate, but it's a book that really tries to predict the future dealing with
Okay.
the climate. So what's the world going to be like in 20 years or 50 years? What's the world going to be like in 100 years?
Kind of
If
like the Book of Eli or something like that, where
yeah,
what's the future, or martyrdom type stuff, right?
I mean, Kim Stanley Robinson wrote a book called 2312, which is about the world in 300 years if we don't, or 200 years, I should say, 300 years, 300 years if we don't do anything about climate change. And there are other books as well. And there's in many of these books they have a kind of a science fiction element to them. So those are really the four kinds of environmental thrillers that are out there. And of course, you've got a lot of other books that are out there that aren't thrillers. I mean, I think The Overstory was a great book, dealing, really focusing on trees and the like, and really creating and crafting some interesting interrelated stories, dealing with environmental issues. And there are many others out there. But if you're just looking at the thriller genre, that's how I would break that down.
Would you say the movie called The Impossible about the tsunami would be an environmental thriller?
I think you could. I think certainly if you have an environmental issue and that environmental issue is front and center in the story, then that would push that into the environmental or eco genre. Sure, of course.
Yeah, that one, that movie just grappled. I mean, that grabbed me big time. That was just an amazing show, The Impossible. That was just about the tsunami. But um, well, I mean, what do you find most enjoyable about writing, Joel?
I love to write. I mean, it's I practiced law for 40 years. I was I started writing about 15 years ago, and it was something that I did at night. It was something that was just I just had to do. When you have to do something, yeah, you're obsessed with it. It's a lot of
Yeah.
fun, and it's what you really are drawn to do. And I was doing it at night. I had this day job as a lawyer, and my law firm kind of expected me to devote 10 or 12 hours a day to that, and I did. But I figured by 8 or 9 o'clock at night it was my time, and if I wanted to watch television or if I wanted to write or do anything, that was for me. So I started writing about 15 years ago, and I just love the process. I love the creativity of the process. I love coming up with my characters. Something that happens when you write, and if you talk to most writers, they experience this. And if you listen to any talk given by writers, they'll talk about it. And that is that when you get to a certain point, and all you're really doing is thinking about your characters and thinking about your scenes, the characters really start talking to you and they start telling you what they want to say. And you wake up in the middle of the night, and this happens to me often when I'm writing. I'll wake up in the middle of the night, there's like a whole chapter in my head, and it's all I can do to either write it down or run upstairs to my writing room. I'm talking to you from the third floor of my house, which is where I have my writing room. And I'll come up here and I'll just write to get down as much as I can so I don't forget it. The worst thing you can do is say, oh, I'm going to remember that tomorrow morning.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the
no,
worst thing. The second worst thing is to just not want to wake up your wife. So you take out your pad and you just sort of write it down in the dark, and you take a look at it the next day, and it's
can't
just
figure out
all
what it was.
you can't read a word of it. So I will either go to the bathroom and turn on the light and write down, or sometimes what I'll do is I'll come up here and I'll write until I at least get my thoughts down on paper. But
No,
it's a
that's
great
great.
feeling. So it's and some of the scenes in my stories, they read very quickly, and I probably read through them in 5 minutes or so. But it might have taken me weeks to get it just right and to get
Sure.
it just so. So describing what it looks like inside of a strip coal mine is, you know, it's kind of interesting. But you don't realize that it took me, the writer, yes, I got down the initial words in a few minutes or maybe a few hours, but going back and rewriting and editing and all of that to get it just the right touch, the right pace. It doesn't bore you, that it educates you. It's interesting. You want to read to the next page. All of that takes a long time, and but if you love it, it's great. And fortunately, I do love it, and I do enjoy doing that.
That's good. I mean, I'm glad to see that you're putting these types of books together because, I think there's an audience for them. I mean, I truly think there's an audience for this type of product, and you're going to find, I think, more and more people start to, purchase these books. And man, I really think that, movies are in the works here. I mean, so okay, I got to ask you. So, have you seen Dark Waters?
I did. I enjoyed it.
Amazing show, right?
Now, Dark Waters is based on a real event.
Yes, right.
And just like Aaron Brockovich is based on a real event and a real person. And, there have been a couple of others that are based on real situations. But yeah, that was a great book, a great movie. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I mean, I've seen it, and we may have some podcasts on that one here pretty soon. I'm hoping. Now, you know, I'm going to tell the listeners, for those listening, we're going to be giving away books. Joel has agreed to provide some books for the show to give away to the listeners who follow up and submit their name and request to be put in the hat for the giveaway. So, Joel, we can't thank you enough for the ability to provide the books for our listeners, because I think it's going to grab them and they're going to just love to see these things and read these books. I mean, again, a mid rage, I wanted to keep reading, but I was like, okay, I'm going to have to get this book. And then Drink to Every Beast, I read some footnotes on that one too, and I was like, wow, this is okay, I'm in. So I can't wait. Now, tell me a little again about Strange Fires. Is that another Mike Jacobs sequel, or is this another trilogy book follow on to that storyline, or what?
This is a part of the series, the Mike Jacobs series. He's now all of 29 years old, and he's a pretty senior lawyer in the office, and so he's being given a pretty important case dealing with contamination from fracking, or a question about contamination from fracking. And he's involved in working with the DEP geologist, trying to determine whether the fracking activity is actually polluting the water supplies of the neighbors. And it's, again, I try to write it in as exciting a way as possible. And by the way, I do that on purpose. I feel if I were to write a book and all I did was just sort of beat my chest and say how awful something is, after about 2 or 3 pages, most people would stop reading. But I try to write my stories in a really exciting, thrilling way so that people will read it to the end because they want to see what's going to happen in the story. But at the same time, it's my little subtle way of educating them. So you learn in Strange Fire, you're going to learn an awful lot about fracking, about all the terminology, about the equipment that's used, about the people who are there and who work in the drilling jobs and all of that, and how they interact with the neighbors, how they interact, in especially in the earlier days of fracking in Pennsylvania. Probably 95% of the people who were doing the actual work were from Louisiana and Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas. Very, very few of them were actually from Pennsylvania because there was really no industry up here like that. So they brought their crews up there with them. And that often created a lot of hostility and anger between the town people and the crews that were up there doing the work. It created a lot of crime because you had a lot of single men coming into a community, sometimes tens of thousands of single men coming into a community that was completely unprepared to handle that kind of onslaught of people. And
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of drinking and gambling and prostitution that went on, and it really created a lot of problems for the communities. Others have written about fracking in Pennsylvania very well. This is my fictional version of a fracking issue. So I try to do the same thing in this book in Strange Fire that I did in the other 2 books, and I think it's going to come across really well. It's already won a top honors in a
Oh,
pen writers competition. I submitted the first chapter to a competition, and it came in second place. And Pen Writers is the big writing organization here in Pennsylvania, so I was very happy with that. And it's another one
that's
that's
good.
exciting, very
That
exciting.
sounds great. And they've only read one chapter, so they got to read the
That's
rest of the
right.
story. And now the rest of the story. Come on. No, that's great. Well, this has been a fantastic interview, Joel. I mean, you're giving us and the listeners a peek into what these stories are about, and the environmental concerns behind them, and the life, and the characters that are kind of going after, or at least trying to address these concerns, and the lives affected by them. So I'm excited about them. I think the listeners are really going to be interested when they get a copy of this in their hands. And we're going to promote this on the podcast, obviously, and have some giveaways through our social media links. So please, contact me if you want to win a chance to get a book. And Joel's he's been graciously going to give us a few to hand out. So thank you so much for that, Joel. We really appreciate it. And
My pleasure.
we'll tag you on some social media and all those good things so you can kind of see what's going on and promote it in your own channels. I think that'll be great. Um, Before we let you go, though, are there anything that you're working on now? Anything new? Any new material coming out? What's going on there?
Yes, there is. There
Teaser, little teaser.
Yes. So I decided to write a different kind of book. And based on sort of a real life story, I've written a book about a young woman who, and I said it in 1988, and I can discuss it another time why I said it in 1988. But she goes down from Rutgers Camden Law School. She's a first year student. She goes down for an interview at US EPA. And on her way to the interview at EPA, she stops off at the International Energy Institute to pick up a videotape for a program that the Environmental Law Society is going to have. She shows up. She says to the receptionist, "I'm here for the video." And the receptionist says, "Oh, yes, it's down the hall. Just go over there to the right and you can get the video." She goes down the hall to the right, goes into a room. They're watching a video. And unbeknownst to her, she was sent to the wrong room. And now she's sitting in a room, and it's a group of lobbyists, energy lobbyists, who are discussing how they're going to stop any kind of research into climate change. And they're investing hundreds of thousands of dollars. By the way, if you've been following the news in the past 2 or 3 days, it's coming out now that one of the main lobbyists for the energy industry was doing exactly this thing. So my transcript is, or my manuscript is basically done. So she gets down there and she's listening to all of this, and she's invited to come back because she first of all, she's down there dressed up for an interview. She's dressed very nicely for as you would for a job interview, and so they think she's another lobbyist. And she's invited to come back. She goes back to law school. She tells her friends. She tells her environmental law professor, and he says, "We've got to get this information out." So he gets her in touch with an environmental group who gets her in touch with the New York Times, and a reporter who sees Pulitzer Prize written all over this says, "Why don't you go back there and infiltrate that organization and see what you can find out?" So she does go back, and she does infiltrate the organization, and she does start learning more and more and what the nefarious things that they're up to. And to make it more complicated and to make it more interesting, at the same time, she manages to start falling in love with the head lobbyist. So there's there's a very strong romantic.
She's torn. She's torn, and as a special agent, boy, she's like,
I mean,
oh man,
you've got to increase the stakes because
oh my
he
goodness.
wants to, there's a part of her. The reason she went back there was to try to, bring the light and split this wide open. And then she starts getting involved with this guy who's the head lobbyist. She realizes that if she does what she's gone down there to do, she's going to destroy him. And there are characters trying to stop her. There are characters pushing her. You wonder about her professor. You wonder about the New York Times reporter. How are they really interested in doing these things, or are they really interested in promoting themselves? So in all of my stories, I have all of this gray zone. And some is dark gray and some is light gray. I never have clear white or clear black. I mean, I really want to have people who are, on the edge, raggedy people doing things that are edgy kinds of things. So I'm very happy with that story. That's done now, and I'm doing some editing on that story that I'm guessing will be out in 2022. That's called Temperature Rising. So
wow. I'm looking. I can't wait. That sounds like another good movie, buddy. I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be good. So, well, Joel, thanks for coming on to the show. Really appreciate your time. We're going to get this out to the masses and tag you on social media, and looking forward to giving the books away. I really appreciate it.
happy to do it, and happy to provide those books for your listeners. And it's been great. It's been a lot of fun talking with you, Sean.
I appreciate it. Well, let's keep in touch. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, buddy. Bye bye.